These are very, very free-form thoughts. This is the first time that I'm taking these thoughts and putting them into words. I hope this makes sense. That feeling can be so powerful that what ends up happening in your head is you begin to start to equate actually taking action with the belief that you can take action. And those two things, if you start to equate those two things, you are fucked. Alright guys, so one of the themes that's been kind of bouncing in my head back and forth over the last couple of days and weeks really is the idea of the self-improvement abyss. Basically, this is what happens when someone kind of embarks on a journey of self-improvement. Doing things, they just have that self-improvement energy. I don't know how else to put it. And what ends up happening is they end up eventually kind of reaching the end of that road, so to speak, and they start to decline. They actually get stuck in somewhat of a negative feedback loop. I think what makes most sense to better contextualize this is to give you guys my own personal kind of observations of my process, as well as the process of pretty much everyone that I observe that starts with self-help. Usually what happens is there's some sort of epiphany moment, right? There's some sort of awakenings. And so for a lot of people, for me it was just getting to the point where I was ready to kill myself and just realizing there was a moment, a fraction of a second, many years ago, this is back in 2011, where I realized that I could take negative energy, all the depression and sadness that I was feeling, and use it positively. For a lot of other people, maybe it's they finally start a new diet and they lose that first 10 pounds. Maybe it's that they pick up a book and that book just sparks something inside of them. Maybe they get dragged to a Tony Robbins seminar, or they go willingly, right? And they feel this spark. Western society is so conditioned to just treat everything in the world of the external. So the first thing that happens, someone loses 10 pounds or they go to a Tony Robbins conference, they seek external validation for their newfound thoughts. So if they lost 10 pounds, usually, and if you're fat, they're gonna come up to you and they're gonna say, or you're out of shape or whatever, they're gonna come to you, they're gonna say, hey man, this is the diet that you need to do. Or if they go to a Tony Robbins conference, now they're gonna start, the second that you start, they're in such a positive self-improvement mode that the second you say, oh man, I can't believe this happened at work today, they're gonna just pull out Tony Robbins stuff and throw that stuff at you. And basically, this is by the way, this is exactly what happened to me. When I first started with my self-improvement kick, I talk to friends or talk to family, and pretty much anything that they brought up, I found some way to spin it into, hey man, this is like what you need to do. This is exactly what you need to do. And so anyway, that's kind of the path, right? Also, another thing that people do is you'll see they start posting lots of inspirational quotes on Facebook, and just think about the psychology of that for 1 second. So what they're basically doing, what's basically happening is they're posting a quote on Facebook. They want the outside world to basically see them as that quote, or see them as the embodiment of this quote that most likely they don't even really fully, truly understand. And I don't see that as a negative. These are just my own personal observations, right? We can't believe that we're now feeling the way that we are, and so we seek validation externally for this new transformation that we're undergoing, right? So for me, the book that really kicked things off was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. That's another thing that'll happen too, right? Someone will read a book, maybe they've read one book in the last 10 years, and then all of a sudden they start going to all their friends and saying, hey, you gotta read this book, man, you gotta read this book. It's the only book they've read in the last 10 years, but now they're convinced that you have to read this book too. And that's all just seeking external validation, right? So, and I remember I had my epiphany moment. I went back to my apartment. That was one of the first books that I purchased. And I remember reading every single word and just feeling orgasmic, feeling like just so empowered. And so, and what ends up happening with that empowerment, and there's a couple places where I think you have to be extremely careful. One is that it can be so powerful, that feeling can be so powerful that what ends up happening in your head is you begin to start to equate actually taking action with the belief that you can take action. Because actually taking action involves risking failure, involves getting up and going out and doing things, and the belief that you can take action. If you think that's the same as taking action, just sitting at home in a chair in front of a fireplace, there's no risk, and so you're always going to just prefer the belief of taking action versus actually taking action. So that's the first place that you have to be very careful. The second thing is that, again, Western culture, we literally do not have the tools. We're not given the tools to go inside, right? And this is, again, just the natural evolution of capitalism within a society. Like, there's not a lot of money to be made by humans going inside of themselves, but there's tons of money to be made by us just looking for external things. And so what ends up happening, what self-improvement should be, is it should be something that you look at from every angle and you use it to better just contextualize your own unique form, your own unique technique. But instead of what ends up happening, because we're so conditioned to just look to the outside for answers, is you hear self-improvement, you watch a video, you don't think about it critically, you don't think about it objectively, you just look at it or read it as like this is the exact blueprint that I need to follow step by step to get to where I want to go. So like that, and that's what most people do, is they just look at it as the exact blueprint, when really what it's supposed to be is just training wheels that you stick onto your person and you use to guide you to find your way to ride your own bicycle. I think that was a good analogy. I'm kind of proud of myself. Again, if you falsely equated belief with taking action, and you're just following self-improvement stuff like a blueprint, what's going to end up happening is you're not going to take enough action. And even a lot of the action that you take is predicated in external things, and you haven't adapted it to yourself, so it's not going to be sustainable, right? Good example for that, for me, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. One of the big secret, one of the big things that the book recommends is that you have to write your goals on a piece of paper. You sit down, you write down your goals for like the next 30 days, 6 months, 1 year, and you stand in front of a mirror every morning. You start your morning that way, and you repeat those goals exactly, right? And I tried doing this, and it's fantastic advice, right? And that may be great advice for some people. What I should have done, just looking back in retrospect, what I should have done is looked at that and tried it. Maybe the first few times that it didn't work, figure out a way that I could take kind of distill those basic concepts and then get them to work within my own personal life. But instead, like for a few years, every few months I would try doing that, and I would do it for a few days, and then it wouldn't stick, right? And what eventually happened is, what eventually worked for me is just I have my long-term goals, and I think that's also important in maintaining action. Is I do think you need like long-term goals, and you need to be able to see them to some extent. So some people say you need to write them out and they need to be vivid. Like for me, my long-term goals are very fuzzy, like they're very dynamic. When I started improving myself, my goal was just to be the best version of myself, right? Now my goal is to massively positively affect change in the world. And I think that's a very abstract, kind of fuzzy goal. But that's just what works for me. And then around that goal, I have these fantasies, right? So right now, what are my fantasies? Right now, I have this fantasy where I open up a school and I basically teach everything that I know to kids. And this would be a school for kids that are basically disenfranchised, kids that have shown that they're hungry, maybe shown just they're a little different, that they have the capacity to look internally, which unfortunately is just not something that is innate or again taught, and give them opportunities, train them in every single thing that I know, give them resources, like start businesses where I just hire them. That's a fantasy that I have, and I see that very visually. Another one that I have is that I could become the president of Colombia. That's a more recent fantasy. I'm not going to get too into detail on that one, but I promise if I explained it and I showed you everything that I've done and what I'm working towards, it wouldn't sound that fucking crazy. So, but anyway, that's just my style, right? So I had these long-term fuzzy goals, and I had these short-term kind of fantasy type things that are always still like ahead of me in the future. And so the thing about these long-term goals, I think part of how you maintain action, part of how you maintain improving, is making small progress towards these goals on a daily basis. So I notice within my personal life, days where I'm making progress towards my goals, I feel great, I feel motivated. Days where I'm not making progress towards my goals, I feel stagnated. That's why, so for most people, cake represents temptation. For me, it doesn't anymore, because I so firmly understand that making progress towards my goals is what fulfills me, and not making progress towards my goals is what just makes me feel stagnated and depressed. And so that cake, like, I don't see a cake, I see something that is just keeping me from my goal. Like not going to the gym, that's keeping me from my goal. Not practicing salsa, so these are all things that are just, so it no longer even becomes really an option for me. It's just my natural mode of being, is to seek fulfillment and to understand what are the things that create fulfillment. And it's ultimately action, at least small action on a daily basis towards my long-term goals. So I read once that if sharks stop moving, they can't breathe. And so I literally see myself as a shark, right? That's another thing about action too, is the more action you take, the easier it becomes. And so I was able to connect such a positive emotion, again, a feeling of fulfillment, with taking action, that now I just always take action. I literally am always taking action. I can't remember, I can't even identify with the past version of myself that wasn't always taking action. Yeah, guys, these are very, very free-form thoughts. This is the first time that I'm taking these thoughts and putting them into words. I hope this makes sense. So just to give you guys a quick recap, self-improvement should be training wheels. It shouldn't be an actual blueprint that you follow. It should be something that you look at critically and apply within your own life. It should only be something that you use temporarily. I think self-improvement, motivation, that can be the spark. But ultimately, if you're continuing to go back to that to keep you moving, like if you continually need to read self-help books to feel motivated, or watch YouTube videos to feel motivated, and you're not able to find the way to cultivate that motivation internally, which is you do that through action and through developing your own style and technique. If you're not able to do that, like that external source of, it doesn't work. That's just a spark. Like ultimately, that's the spark, and action, just repeated action, is the fuel. Equating taking action with the belief that you can take action. They're worlds apart. And so if you do that, again, just logically, you'll never take action. One last thing. A perfect example is, again, this video and my content. You'll notice that I try as best I can to not tell you what it is that you need to do. I try as best as I can. I've lived all the stuff that I'm talking about, and I think my experience is valuable in it, but I hope that people don't take it and try to just copy it directly. Rather, I hope that they take it and use it to just better contextualize their own personal worlds, their own internal, develop their own style, develop their own technique.